Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new and special episode of Tales of the 2S LGBTQ. My name is Douglas Parsons. The Stonewall Riots, also known as the Stonewall Uprising or simply Stonewall, were a series of spontaneous demonstrations by members of our gay community in response to a police raid that began in the early morning hours of June 28th, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn within the Greenwich Village neighborhood of Lower Manhattan in New York. Patrons of the Stonewall, other village lesbian and gay bars, and neighborhood street people fought back when the police began to become violent. The riots are widely considered the watershed event that transformed the gay liberation movement and the 20th century fight for LGBT rights in the United States. Now, as part of our history that should be taught in our schools, we should know that it was common for American gay bars at that time to be owned by the mafia. The Stonewall Inn was no exception. While police raids on gay bars were routine in the 1960s, officers quickly lost control on the situation at the Stonewall Inn that night. Tensions between the New York City police and gay residents erupted into more protests that took place the next evening and again over several nights. Within weeks, these village residents fought back, organized into activist groups, which led to what we have today. June is known as Pride Month. It began at this point, and it's to the people who were there that night that taught us activism, that put it into our queer DNA, that we must give thanks to. Today's a special episode for myself to be able to conduct because my guest today is Martin Boyce, who was there for all of this. At the age of 19 years, he found himself on the front lines of this uprising. Recently, he's been touring Canada to be able to spread the education, spread the news, and to give inspiration to all of us, including younger members who are inspired from those days. Before we bring Martin to our screen, I want to make mention of a few organizations who have made this possible. That would be A Day of Pink, Evolution Wonder Lounge, and the fantastic boys down there. Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Rob. And we must mention the American Embassy in Ottawa. Thank you for making this possible. Martin and I today are coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and it's important for me to say that, as I like to acknowledge that I live within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands of Métis Nation, Alberta Region 4, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Sato, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I acknowledge all the many First Nations whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I'm grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who came before. I continue to open myself to listen, to understand, and I hope you join me as we uncover the truth. I make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those on whose territory we reside. Again, today is a very special episode, and I'm very honored to be able to say today on Tales of the 2S LGBTQ+ is Martin Boyce. It is now time to bring Martin up to your screen and or your listening ears. Welcome, Martin.
Well, I'm glad to be here in Canada, and I admire your tribute to the Indigenous people. Something that's not done in the United States at all. We're on the way there. We're changing the names of certain of our teams, but I do love this recognition of the Indigenous people. It's a great way to start any discussion of gay liberation, of course.
It's the least that myself and it's the least we all can do. We've ignored parts of our history, and it's important that the good, the bad is mentioned and to recognize what that truth is. And so I appreciate Martin.
Well, I
Um,
know who the original inhabitants of Manhattan were. Very rare, very rare. That's the problem. Very rare. I know. I happen to know it because I just read it. But it's not a very important thing for the Americans to mention. I hope they do. And I'm very impressed with this. And I'll try to bring this to people's attention when I come back to the States. I
well,
promise you.
thank you. Well, Martin, you have been touring Canada for the month of May here in 2022. What has this experience been like for you?
It's been a wonderful experience in the sense I've been really encountering youth. I usually encounter my peers. I'm ready for my peers. I'm prepared for my peers because to them it's like talking across a kitchen table. Or I like to think if I'm going to, you know, a little touch of vanity, that Billie Holiday thing of the way she sings to reach the audience and try to change the story to make it interesting to people, but it's hard to do because it's a particular story. But it's been great. I met a lot of young people. I met far more enthusiasm here in Canada than I have in the United States. And it's been a learning experience. I learned something about Stonewall, a epiphany that I did not know before, because I realized that it was the prosperity of gay people at the time that wanted the next step. And the next step wasn't what we call the freedom we're talking about today, human rights, but just to be left alone, to be able to enjoy that prosperity they've now been given. And that was a part of the riots I didn't realize until I was in Canada and thinking about things to say, thinking about trying to reach Canadian audiences to really make them understand what that night was really like and how much it was a night it could have been in anybody's life. Banal than people think. But from that point on, totally exciting.
Yeah. It's interesting that you had to be able to remove yourself from New York and from the United States to get that perspective, to be able to look at it from that broader sense. And it also goes to show that no matter what age we reach, we still learn from events of the past. We're continually learning.
When you have to confront memory, and it's not necessarily voluntarily, it's really an amazing process. It's a human process and something I don't regret, but it's just something to deal with. And it's a discovery. Amazing when you're at my age, you're still discovering something that happened so long ago, even to me. But it's all for the good, of course. It's all for the good. And I just don't like the idea when we talk about Stonewall. I know it is negative, and it was really negative. But the compensation for that negativity was this amazing camp, this amazing laughter, this amazing soul, because there's a lot more to laugh about, even though it was at our own expense. But people that are like that have a great sense of comedy. People that can make fun of themselves, like the way the Jews do, the Yiddish theater does it, or the Italians do. People that make fun of themselves are always people I like, and gays can do it. That's a nice thing.
It's battle worn and we wear it well. Martin, I've mentioned that you were 19 years old when this took place. And so your life at that time, were you an out man at work, at school? What was your life like?
I was out at home. You couldn't be out at school. You couldn't be out at work. You couldn't be out at an institution that meant something to your life. You could be out at home at best. I mean, you could lose your job and lose your dignity. That's the most important thing. You could lose all that if you're out. People are out to each other and out maybe to their family or to their friends. Very limited idea of what we call out. I mean, you couldn't just ask a friend you knew for 10, 20 years, are you gay? You could not say that because that question could not be repaired. You had questioned the morality that we didn't understand, this magic that a gay person is the worst person in the world. And we're solving some of that because I remember there was a murder in my neighborhood and the murderer wasn't pleasant, it was passionate, I think, or something like that, and forgivable to the straight people or the normative people. And he was forgiven. And then there was a man who was found out to be gay, very gay. and involved in a scandal. Well, he was never forgiven. He had to move. The murder could stay.
Mhm.
It was very, New York was not a transit city at all times. People lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. It was wonderful. Little villages, New York was. He had to leave. He had to leave. Not the murder.
And before Stonewall, the uprisings, the strikes, the gathering in public to fight for any rights was very limited. My understanding is that there was one that was done approximately 1962 in front of the White House, and the group of 10 or 12 people had to act very quote unquote straight as holding the signs, and they were in fear.
Well, that was
Absolutely.
the problem. The problem was that they were doing this and acknowledging almost that the straight people were right. They tried to dress this way, you had to act this way, and the conformity and the demand for conformity by the government was right. I mean, it didn't affect us, not the gay people of New York City. It didn't affect us at all. It was almost campy and a little embarrassing. They weren't protesting, they were begging as far as the youth was concerned at the time. They were begging. They didn't like this. That's why there's not many statues to Kameny and there's so many statues to Marsha Johnson, because that's the real difference. I know they were out there, people playing the game. This is not a game. This is our life. Stonewall, makes you understand why have this was far more important. I went to the Majesty Society. I remember a bunch of us Queens went to the Majesty Society, and we got all dolled up because we were scared drags like Boy George, and a lot of us weren't gender conscious. We were just protesting. Like, if you're going to do this to us, we're going to throw it in your face. So I don't think we had to hold on to it. We had to be human beings satisfied and content. And we had a greater knowledge than they did of history, because we knew who was gay in history and what it really all meant, and how the truth comes out after dark all over the world. Those protests were mild. What really was happening, which I didn't know because I knew none of this, we just did it, But it was very different than the 50s, because when you see an opening, a slit of the sky, they say when you revolt, 1789 or 1917, and that's what happened. It was gays were prosperous, and now we couldn't have anything anyway. And there was this opening, this liberal world that said it was liberal and was trying to prove it was liberal, and also had liberality in a parenthesis. And gays tested that. We had volunteered for the African Americans, and we had volunteered for the feminists. We never thought to volunteer for ourselves. We just never thought that. But at the same time, it was a very rich gay life. Oh, it was wonderful, really amazing. To go out every night, it was rich. But the day was for the straight people, and the night was for the twilight people. And we were criminals. And along with us came the hustlers and the blackmailers and everybody else that they imposed upon us. And we had to equate ourselves with them. And we had to find room for them in this world we had to live that was very dark, like a film noir. But it's interesting as a film noir. Our lives were not without humor. That was our soul. So we really have humor. Our lives had this, and our lives had a great deal of joy from this magnificent culture that would have defied the Nazis. It was so well done. How you knew another gay person, let them know if they didn't want them to know. Oh, it was all wonderful. It was all worked out. It was all lived. The younger queens were taught by the older queens, like in the days of Plato. And that history, we knew that history was continuing. We couldn't define the history or give you dates or give you opinions. But it was there. That thing that was happening since Plato was there. And everybody knew it in there.
I love the words that you used with the twilight people. I love that phrase.
In New York, in the daytime, New York was very prosperous, very happy. Girls were on the pill. sexual revolution, a mayor that was liberal, spending money to help us have a good time. And everybody was having a good time. And in the daytime, it's like a party. And at nighttime, the docks emptied and the parks emptied and the parking lots emptied, the cul-de-sacs, and the Twilight people came, you know.
Mm. So on that June evening, you were out and about Stonewall, you were in that area. When did you know that something was up and something was going to change that evening?
Well, I was going to go to Stonewall. And then someone told me we're not getting in because it was like Club 54, long before they had the velvet rope. The mafia owned bar. They chose who to have in, who not to. And so the gay bar wouldn't tip, not because of any morality, but because of making money. All different types. There wasn't one gay type. There's a whole bunch of gay types. The A gays were lawyers, scared drag queens that looked like Boy George, didn't have jobs, could do all this stuff, could put all this makeup on. You know, the black drag queens. We learned tolerance ourselves at Stonewall to each other's space. We learned how to deal with this kind of thing, you know. And that's the way it was. The first thing you learned when you came out, and I thought at first I shrugged my shoulders, was what to do in a raid. You know, the lights are going to go on, and who's ever dancing illegally, stop dancing and move away from your friend. And don't stay next to anybody who can't because the police don't want to hear laughter. And move away and get your ID out. And it was all theory, interesting, but practice was another story. When these things happen, you would see an older gay person crack up. Right next to you, crack up, and you're young, and you'll think like, well, he should be the one leading me, you know. So the personality aspects comes out, and then you have to watch the bartender because they knew how to get out. They're going to get out. I happened to be once in the sewer. I got out with it. But you had to know. It was a hard learning experience, and they wouldn't just enter the door. They could have opened the door. Who's going to stop? Oh no, they broke it down. Just show the splintered wood and the real violence of breaking down a door. All I could think of was what poor Aunt Frank went through. And here they were with their Nazi tactics. Anyway, a certain amount had to go to the jail because of the quota. And anyone without ID had to go. And people had to go. And people they didn't like tall queens, gays. They didn't like educated gays. And they had to go, you know. And that's the way it was. The other thing was if you weren't in a riot, you'd watch one. And that was amazing. And there was a bit of schadenfreude, you know, this idea that it was them, not me. And all right, you watch it. And the drag queens come out to cheers. The A gays come out hiding themselves to cheers. And the young people without ID were on their way to the paddy wagons. And a certain quota had to go. And so I was going to Stonewall. We didn't get in. My friend said we weren't going to get in. I said, okay. So I was trying to think of something else. It was 7 blocks down. And I hear people behind me, a rush behind me. I was talking on the stoop, my back to the street. And it was about a raid. A raid. And Stonewall was 7 doors down. I thought, really? In the middle of the city on Friday night? And I went down. I got past the paddy wagon. And I came to this opening. They had made a semicircle around the bar, those who were released, those who were just watching and such. All gay though, practically. And I noticed this cop, they were called pigs then. And this one deserved the title, Pig. He really did. Looked it really, really horrible. And he was dragging this Latina queen. Oh, he was dragging her into the paddy wagon. I was right in front of him. And then something happened. The first hint that this is going to be like no other night in gay history in New York. She got on, I didn't see her face, but I saw her high heel, member of this kind of lame silver and lots of paste jewels, kick him on the shoulder and send him flying. I turned to my friend Bertie. I said, she kicked him. I never saw this before. I never saw this before. And Bertie said, we'll see. Well, I think about that. Just looked. He got up. He went to the back of that paddy wagon. You heard bone and flesh against metal and this trickly sound. And then you heard a moan that was losing its sense of sound because it was losing consciousness. I was stunned. The audience was stunned. He closed the door, closed it up, and turned around to us and proudly said the way he always said with a contempt and then in invidiousness. And he said, aren't you faggots? You soldiers, so now get out of here. Just to show us this is an election year and you want to carry on and be yourself and be degenerates and show yourself in society. This is fate. This is your fate. And it always happened like that. We're going to turn around and go home. And that's the way it was. That's how they treated us. That's the way it was. But not tonight. Each one of us, he turned his back to us. And each one of us walked towards him. I don't know what we looked like. So the local just kept walking. He'd find out. And as I got close to him, I saw the hairs on his neck rise. Oh, he turned around and lifted that stick and was going to command again. And it didn't happen. He saw our faces. He blinked. He gulped. He ran into the bar. This happened all along the amphitheater. There was enough contempt and divisiveness and derision to cause the cops to all run into the bar. Well, they thought this was very funny, because they were very macho. And they locked themselves in the bar. They showed themselves at the window, and they laughed and laughed. But things had gotten mad. All of a sudden, there was something happening to the whole group. The A gays looked nervous because they would lose their jobs if they're caught doing anything bad, but they were pleading for the first time with the gays in the street gays, to do something. And Jack yelled out, can anybody do something? And all of a sudden, everybody remembered, I think in their heads, I know I did, I know Brent told me he did later, that all the people that were gone from the crowd, with their lobotomies, or they were crippled in beatings by the police, or their parents were called and were thrown in the street, or the police called their jobs and they were, all the casualties came. Everything, that night, it was just too much. The suburb was going to be ruined. Election year, this was going to be it. And everybody agreed that this one night we had to do something. We started finding pennies in our pockets when they made of copper. When they were coppers, and we threw them. And intelligence started operating. Because you see, all these attacks that gay people used to suffer in New York City, and it was a city sport to beat us up. We'd go to the movies, and we'd have to reform if they attacked us and go to a later movie, but we got our thing done. It was just a hiatus. Made us excellent urban guerrillas. Who knew that their cruelty, their tacky cruelty, would make us into excellent street fighters? And that's what happened. And we started to realize what to do. And what to do is, and we all knew, either two things had to happen. We had to vent our anger, which wasn't going to be easy, or there's going to be blood. And that's the two things that stop a riot. Our blood or their blood, whatever. It didn't matter. It was on. The thing was on. It's not your control. It's a movement. It's a zeitgeist. Something you can't control. It's nature, in which can be studied or corralled. And then we went crazy. And Queens started bringing in things to throw, because they could throw things. Sometimes orange peels from the shop that sold juice. We threw it up. And we threw this, everything we could get to throw. There wasn't much. It was bottles, and people were trying to hand things. And riot is a very strange thing because you're moving around. You're not in one place, a kaleidoscope. It's a changing thing in this area in front of Stonewall. And you're hearing shouts and commands and moans and who's down, who's up, and then you're smelling the burning wood and trash cans and testosterone and sweat. And it's just so confusing. It's just incredible. It's like toward Italian futuristic painting. You know, it just takes a while to understand what's. And then all of a sudden, there's lucidity, a moment of clarity, amazing, really. And you see it because it's so rare within the last moments of intensity. And on this ledge, I can never forget as long as I live. On this ledge was this queen who was very neglected and unhealthy and unhappy and not popular and very picked upon by the police, but not a complainer, Miss New Orleans. And there she was on the ledge of a Stonewall window. And the only thing I can possibly compare it to, is why I remember it, is the photo or caricature or picture of John Brown, the abolitionist. This queen was on fire. I couldn't believe it. The intensity. I wasn't looking at anybody else. Maybe they all, but the intensity. Well, she jumped down and became a hero and grabbed a parking meter. And then they saw it. Almost she did it alone. They said they helped her. They started smashing the door. Oh, the contempt continued at the door, their eyes. And then some queen lit the place up with lighting fluid. It's easy way. Easy. I remember, so it wasn't sure she was doing. And then it went up. And then those laughing faces, they started to have this mounting sense of terror when they realized the cavalry wasn't coming. We were an inch of getting in the bar, and they were an inch of shooting us. I didn't know that then, of course, I know it now. And then the cavalry, everything went silent. Everything went silent. The worst thing you could hear in a riot, except for thumping, a marching, goose stepping. And the crowd opened, and there they went. They sent in for this riot of gay people, of contemptuous queens, was even written that way. The tactical police force. They were trained to fight the Black Panthers, terrorist groups. Agents came from El Salvador, the Philippines, and Kinshasa in the Congo to train with them because they knew how to put out an argument. They knew how to put out a riot. They were the ones sent in, finish it off, we need this done quickly. And the government thought, all right, you know what? We're going to show these fags a lesson. This is too much. Send them in. Oh, they came. And there they were with their shields and face shields and all this equipment. I only seen on TV glimpses of it because it was the Vietnam War. And then they were marching towards us. And they stopped because they could not believe. They really could see that they were called in to fight us. Well, we pushed the most obnoxious queens. It's amazing what intelligence can happen in a consensus to the front. Queens that we would like to slap. And we all gathered into this line and we kicked it. We sang this song. We are the village girl. We wear our hair in curl. We wear our dungaree above our Nelly knee. Now that was just an insult to their machismo world. It was such a big insult because he knew two things right then and there. That they were sent in to corral us, to corner us, to end it. And the victory, not of the riot, but of the night, would be to not let them do this, to keep the riot going. Really important. And everybody knew it's amazing how this kind of intelligence can be shared. It's really incredible. It should be studied. And they rushed us, they rushed us. Oh, we just split. But we knew the village, like the Lakota indigenous people knew the plains, or the Iroquois Mohawks knew the forest. They couldn't find it. They couldn't get us. They couldn't capture us. And at one point, we were really behind them. And we told them, are you looking for us? They were destroyed. Millions of dollars were spent on them. Foreign Policy magazine had stories on them. Men's Illustrated had stories on these vaunted he-men that could not put down a gay riot. And the whole point was that. And what happened was that daylight came, and I was on a stoop. I was exhausted. And there was a queen across from me. She was bloodied, I thought it was terrible. But she was, I remember, patting her head. And there was a cop 2 feet away from her, not arresting her. It was over. 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 So the street was destroyed. Destroyed. This was gay turf, our only thing we ever had. Destroyed and raped and destroyed. And the streets are full of glass. It was actually beautiful. It was almost anti-art, anti-installation. I think it's called art brut. It's really beautiful. But I went home with a heavy heart, very heavy heart. Because at the beginning of the election year, they're going to get us. I knew they're going to get us. Nixon was elected, and there was a right-wing revenge type of group. People were running around, a minority in New York always, but powerful, strong, physical, and they're not afraid to use their physicality. And so, I thought it was just terrible for a wonderful summer. And I went home, I got home, and now they never mentioned us in the paper, or they never mentioned us on radio or TV. But the whole city was interested in facts, because my father got this call before I got home that something happened with the fags in the village. The whole city knew from the grapevine something happened with the fags. Very interesting, like strange. And my father said to me, he said, because he was a cab driver for 30 years. My father's a very liberal man. Proletarian man too, but very liberal man. And he said, it's about time you guys did something. It's about time you did something. Well, it was not too much to think about it. I just went to bed. And I knew there was going to be a backlash. They were going to catch us one by one. That's how it was going to be. And we weren't going to be able to go back to Stonewall or Christopher Street. I didn't go back for 4 days. And on the third day, I was coming down the street, and there was this African-American man, very strong, powerful man, throwing garbage into the back of a truck. And he glared at me. And I thought, I'm so sorry I didn't cross that street. And he glared at me, and he raised his fist in a salute, the black salute. The entire block was in the afternoon, stopped walking their dogs, stopped talking, stopped to live because I couldn't understand what was happening, neither could I. I was very embarrassed. I understood in a way that, well, what happened was, for the first time in 2,500 years, for the first time since the sacred band of Thebes defeated Sparta, great Sparta, gays have been able to act together and display valor, not just Alexander the Great, because his army has no face. And here we did it. It was known as a group, because the great macho patriarchy wall that, we all lived in, this medieval world, this wall. At the top was honor, of course, important to straight people, and valor. And we displayed valor as a group. My father understood that, and this man that stopped me understood that. There were cracks in the testosteronic wall in which the police put the pyramid on top. And that was enough, almost, for a beginning. Enough to see the dust start to fall. Just enough to win hearts and minds is enough to go on. And when I went back to Christopher Street, was more political activity on Christopher Street than there was in Moscow in 1917, because they couldn't have thought of all this stuff between the 27th and the 30th. Gays had thought this all along. We just never had a chance to show it, to display it. And it wasn't like New York was the leader and the most advanced, was one of the most advanced cities, but that it was ahead of everybody, ahead of their times, or the gays were ahead of their times. No, it was happening all over. The spotlight was on New York. It was a really great city. I mean, the greatest city in the world. Everybody knew it at the time, more so than now. At the time, everyone knew. They didn't discuss it on the papers or anything. Never discussed it, but you knew it. Cab driver knew it. CEO knew it. New York's New York. And that's why it happened in New York. New York is just an expression of what happened everywhere, including Canada, because the law was passed to help the Canadians, and also in England, the law was passed. So yes, we're all of us Stonewall veterans. I just happen to be there physically, but we're also veterans.
Just to let everybody know who's listening, we have limited time today when it comes to the podcast. So, Martin and Jeremy, who is behind the scenes there, I would love at a future time to be able to come back and continue to record the stories because there is so much to be shared. There's a certain moment when you were talking that I just had to let my goosebumps take over and just listen. And so there were a couple of moments when you were talking that I understand now. Like it's not just reading about it, but hearing about it. And because of time, is it important to you for people to know who threw the first brick? Is that important to you in the storytelling?
Because Stonewall was, first a noun and then a verb, and then it's also a piece of geography now and a piece of history, and it's a myth. And that myth is almost a salute to gay people who are so close to the muses. And history has a muse, Cleo, much neglected, and we have to get to satisfying her. But yes, the myths have been, the muses have been very good to us. We've been very good to the muses. If we were one ethnic group, we were the envy of the world with our culture. It's incredible, really. It's incredible to me, So the myth's important. It's important. It's almost the Homeric myth of having the yes and the idiot, It's gays go back. Something great about gay people as they go back. And they go back to those times. We still need a little of that. We can't recognize it anymore. But sometimes we need this Homeric feeling, this Homeric poetry. We have Walt Whitman. Almost much nicer to have someone read him than to read him himself, So we have this thing. We go way back to the ancient world. And so it's important, yes. Yes, it's a myth. It's okay if they think Judy Garland's death. I was there. I went to. And a lot of gays were there that were at the riot. It wasn't for me the important point, but who knows it's not for them. They're not here to talk about it. And, whatever myth, whoever threw the first brick, metaphorically, someone threw it. That's what's important, the myth. It doesn't matter. We need a myth. There's nothing wrong with a myth or a legend. We're used to legends. We have our stars. We're not used to myths because myths are always used against us, but not in the world of ancient Greece or the world of ancient Rome. And so now myths, we must reclaim myths and use it for us.
Final question for today, Martin. What do we, as the generations who have had this imprinted into our DNA, and as we move forward, what do we need to know about Stonewall that we can carry into our everyday lives?
We're heading for some hard times, at least us in the United States, and in the world too. You can see from this struggle has gone global. And we need to have faith in ourselves. We're right. We're talking about human rights, and we are right. I mean, we had nothing in Stonewall, and still we did this, and we had to do it. So we are prepared in some ways, so they think we don't want to battle. Who does? It's silly testosteronic stuff. We don't want to, if it's coming, we're quite ready to fight it. I think alone in the United States, yes. There are many, I'm not into conspiracies, but I have a funny feeling that they're trying to take the trans in the United States, the trans and the marginal gay groups and throw them under the bus to give rights to the majority gay group. Like you can have these rights, and you can throw these people away because they're not worthy of you anyway, economically or whatever, You can make a lot of excuses. We live in a capitalist country. We live in late capitalism. New things happening all the time. And so I think they're trying to do that. They won't do it. I could tell you that much. At least from New York City, they won't do it. And Roberts' Wade, we got some very big problems, and it can't be just us. We can't worry about our own problems only, just us. It has to be justice. Roberts' Wade, minority groups, immigration. They want to get us all, And you can only help each other by being ourselves. That's the great thing about gay person. By being yourself and having trust and faith in yourself, you are really helping the world. You're in a very lucky position right now in this world.
Amen. Amen. Mr. Boyce, it's been a pleasure, and we'll continue this conversation over the weeks and over the months as we talk to each other. And again, on behalf of our Pride Corner on White group, it was such an honor to have you join us a couple of days ago to be on the street on our now special place in the world, one of the busiest intersections in Edmonton, to be there the night that our mayor proclaimed that to be a corner.
Stonewall. I love that. I love that. And my husband loved it. Really did. I really enjoyed that.
I remember looking over, while I mentioned over the microphone, we don't do the can, but we do the cha-cha slide. And I remember looking over at your face, and it was just beaming.
Not since Hairspray or Thriller I've been so interested in a dance. Not since those things. It really was great. My husband was great, and his camera failed him. We're depending upon Jeremy for the pictures.
Oh, we've got lots of pictures, and we'll make sure that we include you. But thank you for being now part of Edmonton history. And for people who are listening, Edmonton is a city over 1 million people, capital city of Alberta. On the night that Martin joined us in person, we had well over 100 people there in attendance. And the mayor of our city proclaimed the busiest intersection in Edmonton to be our safe space, our corner. And it's going to be there. It's our kids who came out every week and being inspired by you and being inspired by others. And so thank you. Thank you for being present.
Thank you, Edmonton. I enjoyed myself here and had that wonderful, wonderful moments. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being present. And for everybody who was with you at the time, who is no longer with us, those who are in New York at the moment, just on behalf of Canadians as well, we've been inspired and it's led us forward. So as this budding activist in myself, thank you for our DNA.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
On behalf of Martin Boyce, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode of Tales of the 2S LGBTQ+. This is a weekly audio and visual podcast found on all the different platforms. Make sure you press subscribe. We are telling their stories, which happen to be our stories. I just press record, sit back, and let the goosebumps hit me. And I hope it does for you as well. Next week on this podcast, I have Vince Spinato coming back to share more. Last year, Vince talked about his life story, being a certified nose, making fragrances. He comes back and talks about the 100th birthday of Judy Garland and how Liza with a Z, or in Canada, Liza with a Z, Lauren Luft and Joey tasked him to create the personal fragrance, which will be released next month. So come back and hear more about that journey and that story itself. Again, everyone, thank you for listening. Until next time, reminding you to be good, within reason, and always text when you get home. Bye for now.